Hello, and welcome to today's webinar from Emergency Services Times, brought to you in partnership with BlackBerry. I'm Catherine Levin, and I'm the editor of Emergency Services Times. Today, we're going to be looking at communications at major incidents and how to improve this at all levels. Our webinar is a chat. There's no presentations, no slides. It's a conversation that leaves you inspired to find out more. We have a Q&A function on our webinar software, so please do contribute questions where you want to as we talk. We'll get to them as part of the conversation. Often we get very many, so I'm sorry I won't be able to get to all of them, but I would just put in a plea if you could make them short. It's much easier for me to read. Thank you. You'll also receive CPD accreditation for joining us today, and we'll get this by email to you after this webinar, and you're watching catch up. It'll come within the month. Our plan today is to run for 50 minutes in total. So let's get started. Wait for my panelists to join me on screen. Hello to you all. I'm delighted to introduce Chris Uller, who is the Global Business Development Lead for the Emergency Services for BlackBerry, Inspector Darren Spurgeon from Greater Manchester Police, who is currently seconded to the National Police Chiefs Council, and Katie Devereux, who is the NILO National Coordination Lead working in London Fire Brigade. Welcome to you all. So for this webinar, we are going to talk about communicating in major incidents. It comes as inspiration from Assistant Commissioner Pat Goldborn, who works in London Fire Brigade. He and I had a chat at the Emergency Services show last year, and he had a lot of enthusiasm for BlackBerry's ATOC project. And it is inspiring our conversation today. I want to unpick it and understand how major incident communications have lessons that can be learnt by all emergency services. We talk about communications a lot in my world and in your world, and we see it coming up in reports after disasters from Grenfell, the Manchester Arena, and many others. So my first question to the panel today is, what is the problem with communicating at a major incident? I'm going to come to Darren first.
Yeah, good afternoon. So major incidents, it's normally the declaration. So at the start of any major incident, declaration, and it's important that people understand that the major incident has been declared so people can respond correctly, because without that declaration, their relevant major incident plans are not going to be implemented. So it's the importance of getting that information out there first of all, but secondly is the fact that actually getting that information out and actually communicating and under JESIP principles, co-locating, interoperability, joint working, everybody's on different systems. So actually getting that information out first of all is the biggest problem, and getting it out promptly, because it would require a human to actually make that call, and in any incident, that information is changing. So it's a bit like painting the bridge. You get the information out, you've spoken to one organisation, you've told them what's happening, you've passed the full methane of the actual alert, what's happening. That information is taken on, you then pick up the phone, you go into the next organisation. The image then changes, the intel pitch changes, and so on. That can be very difficult in the communications, especially around the major incident. And that's pretty much what the main problem is in communicating a major incident. And it's then streamlining that to make it better and using your resources more effectively.
Okay, so that's clear. So we're interested in being prompt, Chris.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what Darren says there, because it is, organisations on different systems, but when it actually comes to a major incident, the default method of communication is picking up the telephone. Okay, and that's where the bottleneck starts. And like Darren said, you've got to get that information out quickly. So I might be briefing Darren now from the control room about an incident that's happened on the telephone. Katie's waiting to call with me. I could be on the line with Darren for 5 minutes. 5 minutes has gone by in a major incident, that's a long time. And then I brief Katie and then somebody else. So you could be waiting 15, 20 minutes before you get that information. Like Darren said, that information is changing as well. You give that information, and your professional integrity and your professionalism will not allow you to wait for that to get on that phone call. So you start to look at other methods of finding out what's gone on. And that's the other big problem with it as well. Again, in my 30 years service in the police, every operation, every exercise I've been involved with, every incident I've been involved with, particularly multi-agency incidents, communication has always been a challenge.
Okay, so right information in the right place. That's what you told me, Chris, when we were having our briefing for this webinar today.
Yeah.
So it leads me to think about what Sir John Saunders had to say. He did the inquiry into the Manchester Arena bombing, and he recommended an app for contact details for all duty and off-duty commanders to aid major incident response. He also recommended a hotline between command structure and the force duty officer in the event of the declaration of Operation Plato. So I'm interested to find out where are we with this app and hotline idea nearly 8 years on since the 2017 events.
Well, speaking from sort of my perspective and a BlackBerry perspective, technology has moved on greatly, since that time, since the incidents back in 2017, and people did the best with what they had at the time. The emergency services did the best with what they had at the time, but technology's moved on and apps have been developed. BlackBerry's got BlackBerry Atok, and that allows you to create groups that you can send messages to by one click of a button. So Darren alluded to the methane message. So if there's an incident, you can get that message right out there to every key stakeholder instantly, and it's two-way as well, and you get the responses back. And to put that into some context, when we've actually done this, and I think, Darren, you can actually come in on this, when we've ran exercises to test these systems using the old traditional way of picking up the telephone or sending an email, those incidents, when we've run those exercises, have taken over an hour to reach all key stakeholders. With BlackBerry Atok, we've reduced that down to 2 minutes. That is a significant reduction to get that information out about, that a major incident's been declared, the type of incident, the exact location, the number of casualties, fatalities, what emergency services are actually there. To get that out to commanders, if I receive that, that really gives me a strong position to build a strategy and what my tactics will be.
Okay, so Katie, this brings us nicely to you because you are the person who's doing the communicating out to all the NILOs. Could you tell us, before we talk in detail, about what a NILO is and what your role is at the London Fire Brigade in terms of communicating with people before we get into the detail of the communication?
Yeah, so the role of the NILO was developed way back in 2001, and it's come a long way since then. So it is now sort of multi-agency. We have many agencies involved: fire, coast guard, ambulance service, British Transport Police, and other police forces. And effectively, the NILO it complements existing strategic, tactical, and operational sort of interagency liaison. And it's defined as a vetted, trained responder in the emergency services who is a tactical advisor, and they can support pre-planned or spontaneous events in that way. So we have, within the NILO Coordination Office, which I run, we have close to 1,000 NILOs across the country. And the NILO Coordination Office is responsible for the dissemination of information during incidents, whether that is alerts, which it's great, override silence, so we know that we can get that contact with them. We can send information about sort of emerging threats and changes in terms of the incident. So it is about very much the consistency of that information. As Chris said, when you have phone calls, sometimes things can sort of change as you make different calls, but actually having that information in one place, we can send it out to the NILOs, and we know we can see who's received it. We can see that they've responded and acknowledged it, and we know that they all have the same information. So it's a great central place to be able to sort of control that information effectively that's going out to all the NILOs.
Okay, that's helpful. So you've got all these people with it, presumably on their phone, mobile?
Yeah, they have their app on their phones. Yeah, and what's great about it is that we can, it's not restricted to one agency. It's across all agencies, because we have so many different agencies involved. So we know that they are all receiving the same information from the NCO, from my office.
Okay.
And a lot of the time when people have their phones with them pretty much all the time. So we know that information is getting through to them.
Yes, okay. So somebody's asked a question here, which has been upvoted quite a lot, which is, where's it gone? Can this information be shared over emergency control talk groups, which suggests Is that within the airwave environment? Darren, do you?
It sounds like it would be the airwave environment, and currently,
Yeah.
no, we don't do that.
You don't share major incident information to all the NILOs and to other people who would need it through the airwave environment.
We use airwave. We do use airwave during, because we have interop channels. So that is still a core necessity to actually do, because we've got our North West Ambulance for Greater Manchester, got Greater Manchester Fire Control, we've got British Transport Police. They will be on interop, we can do that. But it's the benefit we found in the ATOC system, especially on the learning after the arena attack in Manchester, was who else needs to know. And that's where we're getting the benefit in this system, because the system will send that full methane message to the other partners, such as Transport for Greater Manchester, the not only BTP, but also the arenas. You know, we have those on the system, we have Manchester Airport, etc., etc. So we can actually get benefit there from local authorities, that we actually get the information straight out and in back. And when we're talking about the minutes and the hours saved at the moment, we did a full test of the system before we took the system on back in 2018. And it was taking 76 minutes to do a full cascade, that was being done by phone calls. That's what Chris alluded to. Now we're doing down to 2 minutes. And that's actually filling out the template and hitting send and getting responses back. So it's really quick, but the interrupt channel is still a very key core feature that we still do use. And we also use ATOC as the primary platform for notifications for everybody else.
Okay.
Yeah, Catherine, Catherine, I think it's important to say that so BlackBerry ATOC isn't there to replace organisations' existing systems. You know, they've got good systems anyway, you know, radio systems, etc. But what it does do is fill those gaps. It fills those gaps initially. I mean, the capabilities around the system, it does text to speech. You can send that, and it can be integrated if you wanted to radios, and it will give the message out over the radio. It's just that nobody's asked for that. You know, people are using the radio anyway, more for sort of your bronze level teams, your operational teams on the ground. Okay,
and there's a follow-up question on the airwave channels, which talks about, it says, following the Manchester bombing, there is now the ESICTRL inter-control room channel on airwave. Should this not be used for passing this information?
It is. That information is still there. So when GMP declares a major incident, it will go over SE control, and it will go out that information. So that will go out to our blue light partners. So we're talking North West Ambulance, Greater Manchester Fire, North West Fire Control, British Transport Police. So that information is there, but also we're sending it out via ATOC, and that will still go into the control rooms of the same organisations, because then they can take that information, they can cascade it onto their child organisations. For example, North West Ambulance Service can pass it on to NHS England, hospitals, etc. Because it's in a tangible format. Whereas on a radio, somebody's got to write it down, someone's got to record it, someone's got to record it into their logs, and then that part is all taking time, whereas the ATOC system, it's one button, it's in their system, and then they're ready to go.
Okay, so Katie, does that all sound very familiar? Is that the experience that you're having with the NILOs? That sort of reduction in the amount of time it takes to communicate with people with big consistency, the ability to get to people very, very quickly, but also you creating groups as well. So you're not communicating with everybody all the time, are you?
Yeah, so I mean, it's very dependent on the information that we're trying to get out, and you know, I emphasize that we use it in different ways. We send out alerts, but we also sort of send out information that they may need to know, and being able to send that out via ad hoc, they have that documentation, as Darren said, right there. They don't need to write it down. There's no sort of change in that, you know, potentially that changing as people write it down. It's very much within their sort of their system, and then they can refer back to it. So I think it's about that sort of the consistency of sending out information, and it's really important in terms of comms. You know, going back 7/7 onwards, communication and actually having the same message to the right groups is really important. We have utilised ad hoc in a way we have specific groups, so that can be the strategic NILO leads or the regional NILO leads, and we can disseminate information out specifically to them. So it can be used in lots of different ways, and I think that's what we found is that we do like the consistency. We know that everyone's getting the same message, which we have approved centrally, and we have verified, and then therefore that leads to less confusion.
Okay. And does it leave a data trail so that you can pick that up in terms of learning what happened at an incident and using that as part of debriefing? How do you do that with the NILOs, Katie?
I mean, we have a full sort of audit trail in terms of ad hoc and how we use it. So we always go back and review as to what information has been sent out, when, why, and how. I mean, that is always something we do. And what's great about ad hoc is that we have it all there on our central system, which is then used by my team to sort of coordinate effectively. But we're always looking back and seeing, you know, when things are being sent out and to who. So it's fully auditable in that way. That's what I really like. It's in terms of previous systems, you're not too sure 100% whether these people have actually received that message. With ad hoc, we have that assurance because they respond and they acknowledge it, that they have received that information.
Yeah. So Darren, presumably all that's very familiar with you in GMP.
Yes, absolutely. We need that same assurance, you know, especially in the major incident declaration. The staffing it's short. The resourcing world are looking for the right resources. We need to get the right information out. So today, now using the ASOC system, we can declare a major incident using one operator. That one operator can contact multiples, and it's unlimited of how many organisations we want to actually include. We get to choose which organisations we include in that alert, and then we notify. And then we see the benefit of the system actually doing that chasing, doing that collation, and getting the responses, and coming back and highlighting to the operator, you've had 27 responses to your alert that went to 30 people. These are the 3 that have not responded yet. It allows them to focus just on that part rather than doing that chase, which has taken up so much time historically. But it allows us then to see the time they responded.
Yes, and also just in terms of, as you say, not wanting to waste the time of the operators keep ringing when actually we know they've seen it. So that's a good thing. There's a question here about what happens if the phone communications fall over or if there's poor communication signal. Chris, what happens there if, you know, comms are kind of blown because there's too many people trying to use the networks? How does that behave in that respect?
Yeah. So BlackBerry ATOC, you can send via cellular, via Wi-Fi, connectivity. It's also what we call an out-of-band solution, so it doesn't rely on the organization's network as well. And we have agreements with all the telco companies, the telecoms companies, that they will allow BlackBerry's messaging to go through. So give you an example. So when we have, and we'll all be familiar with this, New Year's Eve, everybody wishes everybody Happy New Year. They send the text messages out. Well, every telecom company, they view that it could be a denial of service, so they throttle back everything. So even though you send that message out at midnight, you might not get it for a couple of hours or might not even get it till the morning. BlackBerry has agreements, and within the, without getting technical, I'm not a technical person, but within the header of that message, it tells a telecom that this is genuine, let it through. That's why we can send messages through from tens of thousands, you know, even, you know, we can send 1 million message all in one go, and they will go as well. And so if the network's there, if you've no connectivity at all, it's like anything else. You're not going to be able to communicate. If you've no connectivity, you won't. But it runs on 2G, 4G, 5G networks and satellite communication as well. If that answers the viewer's question.
And I just ask Katie, in terms of pagers, I know some offices are still using pagers in different organisations. Are you using those to communicate with your NILOs, or are you just assuming that everybody now has a mobile phone and they have the app on it?
In terms of our NILO cadre, because it's across all agencies nationally, we are ad hoc is our way of communicating. So that is what we use. Because you know, in terms of being able, obviously with 1,000 NILOs, you have a lot of people that, you know, join the cadre and then some leave, etc., or retire. And we have a central system that we're able to control who is on it and where that information goes. So ad hoc is the most efficient way and a secure way of being able to send that information and alerting.
Okay, so no pages then.
No,
I feel like I'm talking about an ancient technology when I talk about pages. So just one more on the comm side before we move on to this business as usual communication, which I want to talk about next, which is about MATE, so multi-agency what's the I stand for? The MATE protocol, basically the control where you can talk to different services. Is that Is that relevant here? Is that
Yeah,
different to what we're trying to talk
about? That's your multi-agency
So we'll
intelligence.
put our measure in a minute because I put
Intelligence
it in the chat.
sharing across organisations. Yeah, you can use ATOC for that. We've actually been asked about that, and one of the good features of ATOC as well is even though it can go on personal devices, so they can have the app on the personal device or the work device, you can restrict the information so it just goes to the work device and doesn't get compromised by going to a personal device as well.
Okay, all right. And when we spoke in the briefing, you talked about if another agency, and this question here about this, if another agency is not subscribed, is not a part of the license agreement, but you want to engage with them, you still can. Is that right? How does that work? So if you say, for instance, GMP owns the license for BlackBerry ATOG, but it wants to talk to, I don't know, Stockport Council, and they don't have it, how does that work?
I'll say that. And the way we do it today is we have different ways to actually connect and send that alert to them. We can either invite them into a live alert, so actually just take their details, add them in, and they can start receiving the alert. Or we create them a profile on our system, and then we add their details, their contact details onto it. We then alert that profile, and the profile does the rest, and the system does the chasing for us.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's move on to business as usual then. So we've talked about major incidents. There's clearly huge benefits from having one way of sending one version of the truth to many people at the same time very quickly to free up resources to do other things when, a major incident is taking place. So can we take that principle and use it in business as usual? So if you're doing incidents which aren't major things, which aren't necessarily multi-agency, how can we take that learning and translate it into business as usual? What sort of examples are you using that with in Manchester, Darren? How are you sort of taking the product and using it elsewhere in your business?
Okay, so you're absolutely right. The ATOC solution is a critical event management system for major incidents. Our biggest use case is what we do daily, which is we get a return on investment by using it as a BAU platform for internal communication for all our resourcing alerts, both on and off duty to work and personal devices, and also geo-alerting, which is the right information to the right officer in the right location at the right time. So that's actually our return, because we find that, and we've worked with BlackBerry as our partner to actually build these use cases. And I'm looking at the live system now, actually, on the screen, it keeps flashing up. There's currently 224 live alerts across GMP, and not a single one of them is a major incident. So that shows how much we are using the system. And that's a mix of geo alerts to resourcing alerts. So it would appear that we've got some Oasis concerts coming up. Don't follow them myself, but we're trying to resource them desperately at the moment. So that's all going out, and you're getting those responses. But the system works. If you think back to that methane that I told you about for a major incident declaration, you have a template. That template is a form of information that you need to get out to a target audience. You define that audience either by a group or, as we have done with the resourcing world, is we've plugged it into our HR system. So we're obtaining every day all the latest skill set information of expiry dates. We've plugged it into our duty management system so we know who's on duty and who's off duty at any time. So when we combine all this together, we can send an alert like I'm seeing now. Alerts are going out needing public order level 2 trained officers. So we've gone for who's in date with it, who's got their first aid, who's got their officer safety training, who's off on that day, send it straight into their work and personal device. And that response starts coming in and then it collates, and that saves time in the resourcing world. And an example of that as being a BAU benefit for us is when we had the Southport riots. We had a request for mutual aid, and very quickly we was able to use the ATOC system to identify who had the right skills, who was on duty now, where they were located, get the alert straight into their app, get them grabbing their kit bag and getting them ready to go over to the vans to move over to leave the force area. And we was able to do that incredibly quick, and we do that regularly now for all our mutual aid requests.
So Darren, you talk about Southport then. Can I just ask, so Chris, before we go, Katie, in terms of the Southport and the riots, obviously the NILOs would have been absolutely crucial at that point in terms of alerting them. So Darren's using it in this way to mobilise resources, and then you're at the same time using it with the NILOs. Is there any clash there, or does that make any difference? It's being used for the same incident, but by different organisations in that way?
there's no clash in terms of that, because we're using it in a specific way that the different agencies need to use it. Right. So no, there's no conflict there. I think that's you're as part of the NILO coordination office, I have that central sort of base in terms of information, but obviously you have different levels of communication going, but above us in terms of the sort of strategic level, which that continues to be. It's just ensuring that we have that consistent information via the NILO network. So we can get information in from other sources, and once verified, we can send it out on that. But there's definitely no clash in terms of that. No, not at all.
Right. So your NILO, Darren, is getting the information from Katie, and you're doing your resources within Manchester at the same time. How do you see that at your end?
So you've got to remember that the system is actually targeting specific groups. So when I send a resourcing alert out, I'm not sending it out to everybody in the force. Right. I'm sending it out to just a targeted group. So that targeted group, it might not be the NILO. So the NILO might be totally separate to that. They're doing their part of the work through the system. We're doing our part of work for resourcing. We're then doing intelligence sharing. We're then doing information sharing. We're then coordinating responses. Like I say, right now there's 225 live alerts on the system. So it's being used daily. And so we're getting that return, and we're seeing the fact that the alerts are going out and getting the responses into the system. And it's just saving time. And it's a return. It's a CEM that's being used for resourcing and BAU communications internally.
That's some good acronyms there. Chris, what were you going to say before I brutally cut you off?
No, I was going to say, Darren, I think, for the viewers as well, to give it some context in relation, I'm just thinking of the story or the example you told me about Operation London Bridge and the timescale that it took for you to actually mobilise the request from the Metropolitan Police. Sorry, I should have explained. Operation London Bridge was the security operation for the Queen's funeral in London, and the Metropolitan Police asked every force to provide mutual aid, additional officers to help them with that security operation. I think that's really useful because I think it puts it into context there.
Go on then.
Okay.
So I'll just cover it very quickly. Request came in Saturday morning. The request was to send 77 officers of public order level 2 trained capability down to London, leaving at 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning with no return date. So it was an out of hours request. It came in. We had minimal staff on that Saturday morning anyway, and we had to try and resource this. So we used the ad hoc system. It went out. We had 176 responses in 10 minutes saying they would be available, and we had 84 turn up the following morning.
That is very impressive. Very good. Excellent example there. Well done. Questions. Let's have a look. It says, whilst services should still control... Whilst services should still control... Oh, hang on. Where's that question gone? I can't see it now. Maybe we'll restore that in a moment. Hold on. Right. So, Katie, there is somebody here who says they're a police NILO and they can't get on their work phone.
Well, they should contact
they should contact you by the sounds of it. Yeah. Excellent.
We do have a NILO website. You can contact via there, but if he's a NILO, he would have the NCO contact details. So we can sort that out. We have technical support there that will be able to assist him.
Brilliant. Okay, and then that question's come back. It disappeared. So, while services should still control and command their own resources, are joint control rooms an answer? Interesting. It's a bit off our topic, I think, but would that make any difference?
I think from my perspective, anyway, I think in the ideal world, if you could actually have every organisation, police, fire, ambulance, local authorities, all key stakeholders on the same platform, that'd be excellent. Be all on the same radio channels, that'd be excellent. If we could have them all in the same co-located, in theory, it sounds like it would be good. And I know in some regions they've tried it and they've gone to it and then they've segregated again. So they've co-located, but then they put walls up inside to stop. So it sounds good in practice, but then you look at what's the cost. What is the cost of, change? And it's interesting because emergency services, you're not like, you can't stop for the weekend whilst you do a full kit out. You know, it's running 24/7. You can't just stop and say, let's move everything out, let's replace it with new. And that's a difficulty as well. But I get the question. I understand the question. It's like, in the ideal world, that'd be fantastic.
Yes. Okay. So we've talked about business as usual. We talked about riots, which definitely wasn't business as usual. But it's interesting, Darren, you giving us this very live feel of what it's like to have the system in front of you. It's a shame we can't see it on our screens. So Katie, in terms of your day-to-day, so there aren't major incidents going on all the time. We're not continually deploying NILOs all over the shop. So what are you using it for day-to-day in terms of training and ensuring that all of your the cadre, I think you said there's thousands of them, are remaining, at top of their game in terms of their CPD training and their ability to do the job that you need to do very quickly. So is ATHOC giving you any sort of business as usual benefits in terms of communicating with them?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we are using it in terms of CPD. We are using it as we can send a lot of CPD information out, whether that is about our national events that we do within the Emergency Services Show. We have we're working with RUSI, so that we get a lot of information, academic information, etc. And we can actually push that out via the ad hoc system, which has been really valuable. So it's become a really good day-to-day sort of business as usual system to use to get that information out to the cadre. So we have a lot more engagement in terms of the NILO cadre now. And that's exactly what we wanted, because, you know, threats change, emerging threats change, everything changes. So we need to keep on top of that in terms of the academic input and the intelligence that we bring in, and we need to proactively push that out. I think that previously, you know, when NILO was very much sort of London Fire Brigade, it was quite closed, and actually by opening this up, we're sharing information, we're giving information out, and that enables them to do their jobs more effectively. That's the way I see it. So we send out a lot of CPD information, but then also in terms of NILO courses, because we run the courses, we're always sort of going out to the different regions in terms of their confidence levels for NILOs, to make sure that they are prioritised on our courses, to make sure that, you know, nationally we are in a positive space in terms of the amount of NILOs that we have. So it's been really valuable for day-to-day business. And I think that, you know, going back to many recommendations from inquiries, a lot of it is about communication. And whilst that focuses on incidents, actually the communication outside incidents, day-to-day, is very important, because that all contributes to communication within incidents. So we're always trying to proactively send out information and get the NILOs to engage with us. And I think it, you know, the last sort of few years, we've seen a massive increase in that, which is, you know, really positive. We completed a NILO review after Manchester Arena, and we came up with 48 recommendations. And a number of those were around communications. We've met all those because we're using ad hoc. So it's been really valuable in terms of that, because any kind of communication improvement also improves response times. That's the way we see it. And that's the kind of what we're trying to sort of ensure, that the capability improves with our communication.
That's interesting. You've come across a lot of different things there. So talking about sort of engagement, creating community, about making sure people are really prepared, because the ad hoc nature of major instances, they don't happen all the time, but when they do, you want to be quick. So being continually assured that they all have the skills, the confidence, the network, the communications and everything. So Darren, you were nodding quite a lot when Katie was sharing that with us. Do you want to expand on any of those points?
I fully agree with it all. There is so much you can do with this system outside of it being a CEM. So it's actually finding benefit. You mentioned about, you know, course reminders. GMP also does course reminders, because it lends itself perfectly to that factor. The system will do the chasing for you. It will get the information to the right people and then get their responses. We use it for course reminders on the basis that actually we need to know, are you going to turn up for your course on this day? Because if not, we've got the ability to backfill you with a waiting list. So it prompts them to say, actually, I can't attend. And then somebody else can fill. So we've got a higher ratio now. So our actual waiting lists are right down. So we're seeing those benefits. And that's just one example of the different ways you can use it.
That's interesting. I wonder, do you think the efficiencies that you're getting will be recognised by the inspectorate? Do they ever pick up on this? Have you had an inspection in recent times since you've had ATOC? Darren?
We've had HMIC Peel Inspection. They came in and they actually looked at one of our use cases, which was for geo alerting. And the geo alerting, the one that they looked at was domestic violence protection orders, or as they're now known, domestic abuse protection orders, granted by the court for the most vulnerable in domestic abuse situations, grants the officers extra powers to do certain things. Historically, though, not actioned as often as they could have been. So we now create every DVPO as a geo alert. And as officers move around the force, especially from our force disciplines, such as firearms and the roads policing, they'll move into a new district. It will push notify them and say, welcome to Stockport. Here's your locations for your DVPOs and your geo alerts, etc. for this area. They go there, they get a copy of the order push, they go and knock on, and they can do the checks, etc. So they reviewed that entire use case. The compliance rate was up by 195%. Our victims were loving it. We're now going to be trialing the new depots for the Home Office. It's grown. They deemed it as being innovative and promising, and they're watching it very closely.
How interesting. So, Chris, is that something you expected in terms of this product, the outcomes, to see something that's hotspot policing, the depot, so officers know exactly what they're going into wherever they are in terms of their day-to-day working? Is that something you expected ATOC to be used for?
What I can say is when I first was introduced to ATOC, one of the key things, or any major incident platform, one of the key things that always concerned me is you get these platforms, you get these solutions, you bring them into the organization, you train people up, you get them familiar with it, and then they sit on the shelf for months or even years because we don't have major incidents every day. And then when that major incident is declared, you say activate whatever system it is. And what you tend to find is that people have actually had skill fade, where they actually forget how to navigate around the platform, or they've moved on, which invariably happens in sort of the emergency services. They move on to different roles. So what they revert back to is picking up the phone, writing on whiteboards. And what I wanted to do was bring it into business as usual. That's where I think you get real utility out of the platform. You get a return on the investment, and there's some significant cost savings as well come with it. And it was working with GMP, working with Darren, seeing where we could go with it. And it initially started off with that recall to duty, allocation of overtime, and then the geofencing capability, the ability to send intelligence out to the right person at the right location at the right time, and get an acknowledgement, at the minimum an acknowledgement that they've received it, or you want some specific response back. That's where, and then the creativity that GMP and a couple of other forces are now looking at has really sort of it's blown my mind completely. Darren mentioned there, I know they're now starting to look at it from a management of offenders, those who are on bail. So not all offenders, but certain ones. What are the key priorities? What are the key priorities for the force? What are the key priorities for the community? Because they're two different things. And then we've got, the ambulance service, looking at utilising it for their needs and their sort of business day-to-day usage as well, when they attend hospitals, how long they're at the hospital for, when they move away. So that type of thing.
Okay, so somebody's asking in the questions here, will ESN not resolve the issues? So when ESN eventually appears and it takes over from Airwave and everybody's using it, will ATOC still be relevant? That's probably not a question to ask BlackBerry themselves, but in terms of ESN, it's the new way for that interagency communications using modern technology. Where will we be?
Do you want me to answer that, or do you want to answer it, Darren or Katie? I think again, ESN, Emergency Services Network, I think is important. And you alluded to there, Catherine. When it arrives, and if it arrives, and in what guise it looks like as well. And again, it is about the digital format, and how it's going to be used there. I still think there will be gaps. you know, and we're working with the ESM program because ATOC can be integrated as a certified app for that platform. And one thing we've got to just got to mention, I think I saw it in the questions as well, around that emergency services network. You know, ATOC isn't just about an app. You know, you can send to mobile telephone, laptop, desktop, text to speech to landline. You know, you've got all those different ways of sending it. So it's not just relying on the emergency services network as your main communication platform. And it's an out of band solution as well. So you've got that. If the systems get compromised, it can still be used. You can still get messages out. Yeah. You know, but emergency services network. Getting back to that, I think, yeah, when it arrives, and interesting to know what people think of the date when it will arrive. I used to sit on the board in 2011.
Yeah, no, it has been going on a long time. Katie, do you talk about ESN in terms of your ability to get the NILOs talking to each other and to you? Is that something that you discuss within your group?
To be honest with you, it's I'm very much sort of focused within the NILO NCO. We're very much about using ad hoc in terms of what we do. So I wouldn't want to comment, to be honest, in terms of that. But I would say that anything that isn't in place right now, and when you think about risk, I would say that, you know, at the moment this is what we're using, and it's working well for our NILO cadre.
Okay. All right. Just before because we're going to go with about 5 minutes left, I just want to pick up this last question, which has got been voted 8 times. I'll just read it out. How does ATOC technology vary in the different sized brigades? For example, smaller control rooms, and also with those with just one NILO on duty. So, who wants to pick that up?
So
any difference what size you are?
No, it doesn't matter. No. From again, you know, we've got customer bases, you know, 10 or 15, right up to somebody like the US Air Force, the US Navy, Homeland Defense, you know, which have over 1 million, you know, users and send out at the same time. So size isn't a governing factor.
Okay, all right. So my last question to you this afternoon, as we sort of draw this conversation to a close, is around. Do you think today you're in a better place to communicate should the worst happen as a result of technology, ATOC, but just generally? Do you feel like we go back to 2017 and think about your experience of responding to Manchester, the experience of responding to Grenfell from the London Fire Brigade point of view? Are we in a better place to communicate should the worst happen? So if there was a big incident and we had another report, actually it would say you have moved on, things have improved. Darren?
I would say yes. Yeah, I was on duty on the night of the arena. I wasn't in the city. I was on the outskirts, and I was part of the aftermath of the actual learning. As a Manchester police officer, I hold it close to my heart that I want to make sure that should it happen again, and it most probably will happen again at some point, that we have the ability to respond better. And that's what this has all been about, and that's where my passion lies. I now know that today we use the ATOC system for major incident declarations as its core, but we get that return on investment because we use it BAU, which means we've got familiarity in how to do it when we do need to do it. Yes. So officers know how to respond, and we can get those responses. And on New Year's Eve, we had major incidents declared due to floodings. We was having responses back across the whole partnership. Those who weren't even on the radio network, we had everybody back at 30 minutes past midnight on New Year's Eve. Floodings, major incident declared. Everybody was aware in less than 5 minutes. Okay.
And Katie, same question to you.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think it's a great improvement in terms of, you know, alerting, etc., and comms. You know, originally with the NILO cadre, it would be very much sort of radio and phone, and now we've got a secure, auditable system where we can sort of ensure that they get the right information and they get it a lot quicker. So I see it only as a positive, and I think it's worlds away from where it was.
Yes, explains why Pat was so effusive about it when he spoke to me at this show last year. So Chris, if communications are better, well, the issue, of course, is that if not everybody has it, then it's still going to be patchy. So in terms of taking things forward and wanting to talk to you, are you happy to chat with people who are interested in following up after this call?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have the conversation, you know, and What I would say is, if Atoc's not the right product for you, then it's entirely up to the individual to make that decision. I can explain some of the use cases, but I think, for me, it's, don't wait for the next major incident to happen. Okay. And realize now where your communication gaps are. Once you know that, then you can look at, well, do I use tools like Atoc? Get the tool, test them, embed them, make them part of everyday business. That's what I'd be looking at doing with it. Because most organizations have contingency plans. They've all got the contingency plans. They all test the contingency plans. But the difference being is that when they do test those plans, people are ready for them. The bit that never gets tested or infrequently gets tested is the communications. That communications element. You can have the best plan in the world, but if you can't communicate and deploy resources, then that's where you struggle. I'm more than happy to take calls or any people reach out to me.
Yeah, it's an interesting point now that kind of, if you take the technology out of your specific product, the principles are sound in terms of that preparation and being ready for it whenever it happens. And I hope there was that all motor services are doing that anyway. But it's just a useful reminder, I think, in terms of this conversation today. So it just leaves me to ask you to do the final thing for me, which is to give some advice to our listeners this afternoon who will want to know what to go back to their kitchen or their school, their office, or wherever they are, to have a conversation about this and say, actually, I was on this webinar, what was this thing I want to talk about? What is the one thing you'd like them to go away and talk about from today? What's the big thing what's the message you'd like to take away? So Katie, let's start with you. What's your advice to our listeners?
I don't know. I think my advice would be fairly boring, if I'm honest. I see this. I'm very much into governance, and this is where we ended up with the ad hoc system, looking at governance and then thinking about, imagine yourself in the future in an inquiry. What could you do differently? And what can you change? And, in terms of governance and risk, make sure you go through the, efficient governance process to ensure that you can always justify having a system like ad hoc, given what it provides.
Thank you. That's useful. Thank you. Darren?
I've got so many things that I could say on this, but
can you give me one, because we're running out of time?
I'm going to keep it as short as I can. I think the thing is, whatever system you go for, if you go for something like Atoc, you've got the connectability factor where you can connect with other organisations, two-way instant communication. But with what I would say is, be innovative with whatever you go for. Push the boundaries, because innovation allows you to release so many more benefits.
Okay, excellent. And Chris, what's your one piece of advice you'd like them to go and think about?
I think technology is there now. Okay, utilize it. Whether you go with BlackBerry or any other solution, technology is there. I think going back to 2017 and onwards, and in the past we've been forgiven. Emergency services have been forgiven for maybe not reacting as well as you can do. I think given now, it's harder to forgive when you know about something. That's the difference. If you didn't know about it, it's easy to forgive. Technology's out there now. There are capabilities and cost-efficient capabilities that you can actually introduce into organisations. That would be my advice. I think communications is, I say you got the best plans, but communication is the oxygen that feeds the actual response to an incident.
Lovely, thank you all. So that's governance. Think about what it would be like to be sitting in something like the Grenfell inquiry, which, having sat in the press room when that was going on, it was quite a full-on place, and I would not want to be on the stand in the inquiry. So think about the governance, think about what you're going to say, how you're going to talk about what you did. Innovative, so push the boundaries, see what's, just think wider than perhaps you currently do. And the third one is to do something different, to think about communication as oxygen, which is quite a nice one. So quite like that. Thank you, Chris. Which just leaves me to thank you all very much for joining me this afternoon. I'm going to do my outro now, so I'll thank you, and my colleague will put you into the backstage. Thank you very much. So that was a great conversation, really interesting. I haven't done a webinar for about a month or so it's nice to be back in this room with my lovely screen. So I just want to thank BlackBerry for partnering with us for the webinar today, and to thank you and my viewers for joining us this afternoon and for all your questions. There's been absolutely loads. I'm so sorry I haven't got to them all, but hopefully we did some of them justice. This webinar will be available to watch on catch up via our website. Any notes for the webinar will be hosted there too. You'll receive CPD accreditation by email, as I said at the beginning. You'll get that soon if you're watching it now, and then if you're watching on catch up, you'll get it within a month. Do check out our new podcast. So it's something called For Every Response, which launched our second season this week. And I interviewed David Boyle, who is the national lead for GESIP. So given all the stuff we've talked about today in terms of communication, I think GESIP is a big part of that as well. So do go to your favourite podcast platform, look for Every Response, and have a listen to my chat with David. It's really interesting. And then also visit our website, motorservicestimes.com, and sign up for our weekly or daily digest to stay up to date, because there's always lots going on. So just leaves me to say thank you very much for watching.